Okay, we should be live. So, hey everyone, I'm Alyssa Hollingsworth. I'm one of the Ride on Con organizers, and I will be here moderating our event on finding inspiration. So, first of all, though, I'm going to have everybody introduce themselves. So, Hannah, would you kick us off?
Sure. My name is Hannah Carmona Diaz, and I am a children's book author. And my book, Beautiful, Wonderful, Strong Little Me, came out last year. And then my new book, Dazzling Travis, comes out April of this year. So a couple months away. And so,
Awesome.
yeah.
Exciting.
I'm excited.
My name is Monica Hay. I am getting my master's in book publishing at Portland State University. I graduate in June. I also work for literary agent Laura Bradford, and I also work for I intern for a scout through Franklin and Siegel. So I work with two different people in the industry. So I'm really excited to be here. I'm also a writer, but I'm not published yet.
Do you want to explain what a scout is just real quick?
Yeah, so they sell rights to foreign publishers.
Sweet.
Oh,
Yeah.
And then I'm Alyssa Hollingsworth. Like I mentioned, I help organize Ride on Con. And I also am a middle grade writer. My debut, The 11th Trade, is hanging out behind me. Came out in September, and the second book, it's looking like it's going to be out spring 2020. And I have a literary agent, Amber, who is part of Ride on Con. They've been part of Ride on Con for the last few years. But I mentioned that because she signed me on a fantasy novel, so I think probably I will start talking fantasy YA a little bit in the course of this discussion, because that's the most fun place to find inspiration for, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, cool. So we're gonna cheat and kick off with a question I asked us.
All right.
on the comments.
Yeah, I saw that.
Because I was just curious, thinking about what we could talk about. So before we talk about the places we do find inspiration, it can be really overstimulating to be around all of these different ideas and stuff, and having all these opportunities to get inspired. So when you have like a plethora of inspiration and thoughts and things, how do you guys like to focus in on what's useful inspiration or productive versus what's kind of just distracting?
Do you want to start, Hannah, or do you want me to?
You can start.
Okay. I'm a big believer in trying things that some people say are really awesome and then seeing which ones work for you. I think a lot of people will try different, they'll go to a coffee shop and try to write, and they're like, oh, this is like way too overwhelming. Or they'll like go to a tea house, or they'll stay at home, or they'll like read this certain book, and they have all these different people saying, well, this is inspiring for me, so it will work for you. It might work for you. And you have to try it out and see if it actually works for you. That's something that I've done a lot. Is I'll listen to writers like at talks or something like that, and see what they think about inspiration and what helps them. And one of the people that I really admire is Laini Taylor, Strange Dreamer, author. She's always talking about try what works for you and do what works for you, because she has her certain ways, and every author has their certain ways of getting inspired. And you can't do everything. It's just not possible. I mean, like, it's just not something that you should or try to do. But what do you think, Hannah?
Yeah, I agree. You have to really do what works for you, because I know, at least when I first started writing, it can be overwhelming. I mean, I was literally that person that was Googling, how do I get inspired? Or what do I do when I get inspired? And there's a lot of information out there. And so you kind of just have to listen to the advice, take everything with a grain of salt. And then, like you said, try it out, see what works. For me, I do a lot of meditation. And so that helps me hone in my inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when you have all these ideas being thrown at you, it kind of helps me ease my mind and be like, okay, this is the idea I think I'm going to focus on. And it makes me, this is the atmosphere I think is going to help me be creative to write that idea.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was cleaning my room or tidying my room today because I was inspired by the Netflix stuff. And I was thinking about how could you apply this sort of spark joy message to writing, and it's something I mentor a lot of new writers, and it's like that with figuring out like which things are beneficial to help you be productive, and it's like just trial and error, and which one do you hold and then you're like, oh yeah, that's the thing, and which one do you look at and you're just like, that's overwhelming, that's
Right.
crazy. Like for me, I love, crazy intense outlines, but I know a lot of authors who would look at them and run the other way screaming. So
That's me.
yes. Cool. All right, let us talk about the next one. We have a question from Krista, which is, can you talk about inspiration during the revision process specifically? How do you keep the glow of that first draft going when you are doing the hard work of darling killing, plot tinkering, and rewriting? Hannah, do you want to take us away first?
Sure. Revisions are hard for me. And so I love first drafts because you can just kind of let it all flow and read it. The middle grade novel I've been working on, I'm on my 27th revision.
Wow. Yeah.
So for me, staying inspired through that process is listening to myself, listening to my mind, and knowing when I need to take breaks, when I need to pull away from the project, when I need to just read a good book that might or might not be related to the theme of that project, but that's going to get me excited. I know one of the books a writer recommended when they read some of mine was The Jumbies. And so, I stopped working on my project and I read The Jumbies. And for me, that was inspiring to be like, oh, yes, this story, it's, this is what I want my story to be like.
Yeah.
And so it's finding that you got to keep lighting your flame, right? Reigniting yourself to get through those revisions as to why this book is important for you.
Right. Excuse me. Sorry, cough. I'm a big believer in filling your well. And so sometimes I'll hear people one of my friends is an author, and she says, I have to keep reading a lot of books to keep inspired, because if I don't read, then I won't feel like I'm filling my well. And everybody's different that way. Some people don't like to read while they're revising, because then the other work kind of comes into their work and they feel like it's not making it as genuine. But for me, I have to read a lot in order to fill my well, because if I don't, then I'll feel like I'm not part of the like creative wheel, I guess. That sounds very like romantic, but that's kind of how I see it. That's what helps me. Revising is really hard work. I'm revising my novel right now. I actually really like to read like fiction, nonfiction books about writing. That really helps too. Like I'm reading this right now because I have writer's block sometimes, and it really helps because it kind of like talks about the brain and like why these things happen in your mind. And it's just helpful because I have a lot of resistance sometimes when I'm revising, because it's like, I don't want to kill my babies, but you have to kill your babies. You have to kill your babies to find a better version of itself. And so when I revise, it's all about reading and probably also talking to my community. That really helps. I recommend getting involved with like friends and family and like anybody who wants to be part of the process, and people who also write. That's like a really big help, because then you don't feel as alone.
Yeah, you need places to vent, especially when you're killing the babies.
Yes.
I went through that because I'm currently unagented, and so I had sent out my middle grade novel to an agent who was like, you probably are really attached to this. He was a main character. She's like, but I think the story would be better without him. She's like,
yeah,
take it with a grain of salt, continue your revisions. And I was like, I think you're right. But I needed to cry and I needed to vent about it.
Yeah, my first draft of my book, I had a character, and my editor was like, you need to cut her. And I was like, ah! I was like, okay, I'll cut her. She's out.
Yeah, I think for me, so I'm weird-ish in that I really like revision. I hate drafting. I really like having something on the page and then feeling like I'm making it better instead of just being like, what's happening? Even with my plot, somehow I'm still like, feel like I'm wandering around in the dark. But so for me, it's kind of rewarding and inspiring to see how the draft is improving as I go. But a big thing is sharing it with other people, whether that's beta readers. Over Christmas break, my nieces were over in my area, and so I read chapters to them, and it was really exciting to be able to watch them. They're the right age range, and it was exciting to watch them react, and also be like, what do you think's going on, and kind of plumbing their minds for their thoughts. And that sort of thing can be really intimidating, especially reading aloud to like someone in person, but it's also really fun because you get to like see the live feedback. Definitely do it with someone who's fun to read to, not with like, I can think of some cousins who I would never do that with.
Well, I think reading out loud is really helpful to know what you need to revise in the first place. Because when you read out loud, you're like, this sounds really awkward. Or like you realize what is on the page. I definitely understand reading out loud. One of my friends read my book recently, and she was so inspiring because she's like, I loved it. And I'm like, this is what all writers need. Like, they need a cheerleader.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'm finding with book 2 that I'm working on is now that I'm working with a publisher and my agent, but actually 2 publishers at the same time, because my US and UK publishers are different. So there's lots of the hurry up and wait stuff where it's like, oh, you must do everything in 3 weeks, and then in 2 months maybe you will hear something back, sort of start and stop, which has been a difficult adjustment for me as a writer, because my first book was much more like, I drafted it, I revised it again, I revised it again, and now it's like going places or whatever.
Right.
So when you have like less control over it, it kind of is different. But one thing that I'm finding is that for me, it's really important in the revision, well, in the whole process, but in the revision process particularly, to keep up momentum. And if somehow something happens where I feel like I'm just stalled, it's really hard to get back into the flow of it.
Yeah.
And so I'm still figuring out how to do that when your life depends on other people giving you things that you need to progress. But finding ways to kind of keep those thoughts going, or reading is, like you mentioned, is a fabulous way to keep kind of inspired by the feel of this is what I want it to be when it's not terrible trash anymore. And I also really like, I do this a lot for drafting, but I do it a bit for revision too. When I like get my notes in and I'm like overwhelmed and there's so much to do, I like to kind of go back to what was my original playlist that I made for this, and what was my Pinterest board for this, and kind of play with like graphics and things, and do some kind of creative other things to remind myself this is why I like this project and can do this stuff.
Hannah, do you have a playlist for your books?
I don't. I'm not a playlist person. I sometimes do like Pinterest boards. Sometimes it's not. Picture books are for me more like storytelling. So for me, my mode of like, I guess my playlist quote is that I'll tell my kids the story over and over. And so they'll hear the same story, but I'm changing stuff in it.
Right.
And I don't do playlists, even with my middle grade novel.
Yeah, I like to listen to music, but I don't have a playlist, but I feel like I should try one. I feel like I should start one and see where that takes me. But I also feel like it's procrastination in some ways. So I don't know.
It might be. I can neither confirm nor deny. I have fun with playlists. With middle grade, it's a little bit harder because every song in the world is about like romance.
I know.
So it's like that part worked, but the rest of it doesn't fit my 12-year-old's experiences. But one thing that I found that I like, and this is just how much of a nerd I am, is that I enjoy making playlists with words, but I also enjoy making soundtracks using just instrumental pieces and thinking like, this character would sound like a cello, this character would be a violin.
Wow, that's super cool.
And it's really fun, especially again for fantasy. It's particularly very fun because there's so many good tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how nerdy I can get. I don't know if it really helps me or not, but I enjoy it.
Well, that's good. Whatever helps, helps.
It's true. Okay, let's see. Our next question is from Heather. My story ideas come few and far between. I'm always afraid that one day they'll just stop coming, or the few I have to work with just won't sell. How can I stimulate and nourish the muse?
Yeah. So as a writer, I've been in a place where, I mean, I have story ideas, but when I talk to my friends who say like, I have 1,000 story ideas I want to write, I'm like, that is not me. I have like 3 or 4 usually that are like percolating in the back of my mind. And that's fun because I'm like, oh, I could start this story and I could see where it goes, but I don't have a ton. And I think people beat themselves up for not having a ton because we hear these writers who do have a lot. For me, stimulating the muse is about being part of my community, as I mentioned before, and also doing a lot of reading, probably in the genre of my choice of what I write. So if I'm writing fantasy, which I mostly write fantasy, I'll read a lot of like young adult fantasy or middle grade fantasy, because I think that the muse likes to be stimulated by things that are similar to what the muse wants, right? Like what the muse is trying to make. But that's just me. Some people might be like, I can't read while I'm writing. I can't read something similar because it'll be too much. But for me, I have to read something similar to what I'm writing, like something similar in the sense of like, if it's a high fantasy or if it's, you know, any kind of fantasy that's specific to like, I like to read Sarah Beth Durst. She recently published Queen of Sorrow, I think, and that's like an adult fantasy, but she also has a lot of YA and middle grade fantasies out. And I just love to read her work because it feels kind of like my work sometimes, you know, and it feels like, oh, this is like what my work could look like if I, you know, keep working at it. The muse likes to be practiced. So that's my opinion.
Well, I'm kind of that writer. I have an entire book of ideas. I think it's because I've been doing theater since as long as I can remember. I went to school for theater, and one of the things that they never let you do is basically to stop having ideas. And I had to, I mean, they wouldn't let us self-reject. We'd be in the middle of an improv class, you know, and you can't stop the scene. You know, what's the first thing that came to your head? I'm like, I don't know. I'm thinking about how I have no ideas. And they're like, then use that. Do a scene about how you have no ideas and see what happens.
Right.
And so for me, I think because I've been conditioned to come over that blockage of self-rejection of this is a bad idea,
Right.
that I almost just, I'm willing to write anything. They're not all good ideas. I'm not saying they're all good.
Yeah.
But you never know where it's going to take you. I mean, you write a short story about the weird guy that you saw at the park the other day. And that may stimulate your muse when you're in the middle of writing a chapter for your current book. And you never know. Maybe he becomes some character that your character sees. Or you just never know where these little short stories take you. And like you said, it keeps the muse in practice, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think that playing is really important. Like playing with things is super important. And I think that as writers, we're like, oh, I want to write this, but I want it to be like a finished product that I can like be really proud of. And that's great. But also it's fun to just play and not have that piece go somewhere that needs to be specific. Like it doesn't have to be in a novel or a short story. It can just be a play.
Yep. And yet I think we forget that as writers, that we know that the end game is, you know, we want people to read these books.
Right.
But a lot of us started writing because we like writing.
It's fun.
And so you have to let yourself have fun with projects that may go nowhere just because it was fun.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the muse is a delicate balance of just kind of having fun and having grace for yourself, and then also working hard when it doesn't feel fun anymore.
Right.
So I think to the question, I think because she asked one day maybe they'll stop coming or it just won't sell. And one thing I would say to that is I always have a panic attack after, not like a real panic attack, but I worry after I finish a project because I'm like, what if that was my last idea? Because I have you know, some ideas kind of trailing behind me, but especially now when I'm like, I literally have to sell these ideas to someone who's a professional and I don't know if any of them are good. It's really intimidating to then be like, oh, I just finished this beautiful thing that like I poured years into, and now I have to start at the beginning and I don't even know my character's name. And that's like a really difficult block for me normally. And I like to stimulate ideas by kind of going back to some people say like write what you know, and I like to think about like write what you question. Like what's something that you wish you understood more, and then thinking about like what's a place where it would be fun to explore that, and then kind of go to Pinterest and spend too much time there.
I have to say I don't like that advice, the write what you know. I've never liked it because as a fantasy writer, I'm like, excuse me. I don't know what it's like to be in another world, maybe in my head. But I think it's write what you're curious about, which is similar to write what you question, or, you know, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Cool. Hannah, I'm really curious about if there's like specific things in picture books, sort of in that part of the industry, that you find helpful for generating your stories, your type of stories.
So for me, see, I'm like on the opposite end of all these. I write what I know. My first book, it's about being asked the question, what are you? And it's fun, and you know, it's whimsical, but it's a topic that I know. And so that's where I write. I've made up a lot of fairy tale stories and that kind of stuff. And also in picture books, it's harder to sell those fairy tale because there's so many, you know?
Right.
And I'm not saying don't write those. I'm just saying sometimes you have to, like the person was saying, you know, talking about if the idea will sell. I don't think you should ever limit yourself. But I was conscious of what books I was going to pitch. So for me to say I could relate to this topic of being asked, what are you? Or like in my second book, it's about a little boy who loves things like pink, and he likes dressing up and that kind of stuff. And it was actually based off of a true story of one of my students. And so for me, I found, at least with picture books right now, we are in a place where the industry wants to see something a little different than just a story about a frog and that kind of stuff, because there's so many of those. I forgot what the question was. Did I answer it?
Just if in the in the picture book side of the industry / creative zone, if there's like specific things that you find inspirational for writing, like specifically picture books.
Okay. Yes, I think with picture books, you have to hang out with kids to get inspired. Don't make what you think kids are going to like. Like, actually hang out with some kids. Get some nieces, some nephews. Go to the playground with your dog. You know, you don't have to be creepy about it. I have 2 kids, so I can kind of like ease in there a little differently. But if you're going to write picture books, you have to, number one, read picture books and draw inspiration from that. See what you do like and what you don't like, what feels cliche to you. And then again, talk to kids. See what's going on in their heads.
I think that's something I tell everybody. I'm like, if you're going to write something, you need to read a lot of it. Like, honestly, you need to read a lot of it. Like, that's some of the best advice anybody can give you, is just read a lot of what you want to write.
And have you found, working with literary agencies, can you tell when a manuscript comes across the desk? Do you read manuscripts? I should ask that first.
I do.
Okay. Can you tell when a manuscript comes across the desk that's from someone who's read a lot versus someone who hasn't?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When I'm reading manuscripts that come across the desk, for a while I was going through the slush pile, and I could tell within the first like 5 pages if someone was well read in their genre, usually, or just well read in general. Not because like, oh, they're well read and like they know so much. More like it comes across that they are keeping up to date with the industry. And they're trying to understand what's coming, what's come before them, and they've read things that they love and things that, you know, have been published recently. And it shows in the writing, and it shows in the way that they even structure their bios, stuff like that. It's pretty clear to me pretty quickly. We get a lot of, I mean, I've definitely seen, I mentioned this in my talk for like the Right on Con panel for next week. It's obvious to me when someone isn't as up to date on the industry when they comp like Harry Potter or Percy Jackson and stuff like that. And I'm like, maybe don't do that. That's not the best idea. Because I think if you read a lot and you read a lot of some of the recent stuff that's coming out, then you'll know what's really new and what's really exciting for publishers and for readers. And sometimes I think that writers can feel a little bit disconnected because they're just so focused on writing, which is awesome, but you have to read, and you have to read also recently. You have to read recently stuff, like stuff that's published in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
So we all seem to have places that we like to go for inspiration. How do you guys organize your inspiration? Or do you? Does that make sense? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. What do you think, Hannah?
I'm trying to organize my thoughts. You can go first on this one.
Okay. I organize my inspiration based on what I'm trying to work on that day. So for example, if I'm revising right now, and I'm also writing a book with a friend, and so when I think about the book I'm writing with my friend, I kind of base my inspiration and like what I organize. It'll change based on like when I'm writing with her and when I'm revising. When I'm writing with her, I usually want to like go meet up with her in a coffee shop and like have fun and like write something exciting and like just see where the wind takes me. And when I'm revising, I kind of have to be at home at my monitor. And like outside, there's a really pretty tree that I get to see when I'm revising and stuff. But I have to like be structured and feel like things are flowing, not in just like the revising, but also just like things are calm around me. I don't know what it is about revising that makes me need to do that, but it's like things need to be like organized when I revise, like in front of me. And I think that's just, you know, everybody's different. I think some people are like the opposite. Some people can't write at coffee shops. Some people can't write at home. But I organize my day-to-day life when what I'm writing based on like what my mind needs at the time. Like sometimes you will think I need to, like I go to a coffee shop to write every day, but that doesn't work for you one day. That's okay. Like you can just do something else, you know, like what does your mind need at that moment?
I think that's exactly how I would word it. I don't know if we have anything to add to that, because that's exactly what I do. It's like, what am I feeling that day? What's going to make me feel inspired? Is it staying at home in my pajamas to revise? Is it going out in public where I know I can get up, stretch my legs, take a break if I need to, distract myself if I need to,
right.
to work. Yeah. And I think for me, at least, that's where meditation came in, because I feel like I can get in tune of what do I need today? Where do I need to be?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's a really good idea to meditate. I should do that.
The idea from another writer that did it. I cannot remember her name, but she talked about it in a conference I went to last year. And she talked about how writing is kind of like a marathon. And so, you know, you don't just run into a marathon. You don't just start running. She's like, you do stretches, you do all that. She's like, for writing, you know, the way that she set it up was she would do a small meditation. She might do like a couple jumping jacks, like literally like get herself like hyped up about writing. I was like, I love that. So I had to find my own mini like 7-minute warm up of like what's going to get me hyped up and in the headspace.
Yeah. And is that meditation, or is there other stuff that you do? Will you tell us the secrets?
For me, I always start with meditation, and then I do, like you said, like to have an organized space. I don't know what it is, but I like to have wherever I'm writing, it has to just be organized. I don't let myself go crazy. I'm not going to like start vacuuming, do all that. I'm like my immediate space right here. I like it organized, and I like candles. I'm real basic.
Oh, candles. Yes.
Candles.
I love candles. That's so funny. You know, I will say that when I'm cleaning, some of my best ideas pop up. Like when you're just relaxing, like I love cleaning, and sometimes I clean like too much and I'll be like, oh, I just want to procrastinate all my life by cleaning. but some of your best ideas happen when you're cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the brain break, you know?
Yeah, definitely. I am much more structured, which shouldn't be a surprise, in that I like to set up routines that it's like, okay, every day at this time I will be in this place and I will do this much. And I let myself off the hook if I need to on a particular day, but that kind of structure helps me. I also do either of you guys do like writing, like project journals?
I have a project journal from my first draft of my book. Though one time I lost it at a conference, and then I like got really freaked out, and I was like, I had to put everything on my computer now. And then I found it, luckily. But it like totally freaked me out and got me away from doing it on paper.
Oh.
But yeah, those are very good ideas.
What is a project journal? I'm not sure what that is.
So I have one right here. In fact, so I did my MA at Basketball University in writing for young people, and it was something that our professors really pushed for us to try, and I really loved it. And I'll say again, it's a lot more fun to do with fantasy, because basically what it is you're just kind of doing character notes. Like I do all my casting for my characters. These are actually my character arcs, which have little lappy things. It's very exciting pop-up books. But you can also do things where, for my fantasy, I had a boarding school that was one of the prime settings, and so I did a floor-by-floor plan of each part of the boarding school. And I wanted to figure out what kind of fashion sense my various characters had and what that said about them. So I collected things on Pinterest, but then printed them out and collaged them and wrote my notes of like, what is this character's like favorite color to wear, and what does it say that character wears the more trendy collar turned up coat of the 1795, and that sort of very nerdy stuff. And then you can also do, like I like doing wheels and things to kind of make myself think about character dynamics. This is my, what I call emotion versus logic wheel, where I see which characters are motivated by logic and which ones are motivated by emotion, things like that. But it's just a fun way to scribble, and I find it a really good way to just get off the computer sometimes, because sometimes it can feel so constraining to just like be constantly looking at the blank word page.
Right.
In the glow of unhealthiness. And it feels good to like take your journal and go to a coffee shop or go on a walk and sit and write.
I have to say, I'm not nearly as organized as you.
Few people are. Famously, my actual literary agent said to a friend who she also represents that that she finds me intimidatingly organized.
I would say that's how I feel too.
I was like, I could never do that. It's beautiful though. I want to flip through it, but I could.
I'd love to flip through it, but I have tried to make my thoughts go on paper like that, and I can't find my story unless I'm in the middle of the story and writing it at that moment. Like I have to be able to like open up. It's like when I write, it's like a house. Like Lady Taylor, one of my favorite authors. I'm going to mention her a million times because she's one of my favorite people in the world. But she says that writing is kind of like a house. You know, like you have to discover the house. Like you can't just walk in and know what the house looks like. And for me, that's what writing is a lot of the time. Is like I have to open the doors and like look under like the cupboards and like open the closets and like air it out and see what it looks like while I'm writing, rather than just be like, this is the house layout. You know, that's how I am.
It's funny because I think that I'm the same way, but my exploration is through like all this plotting and stuff. Like obviously the story changes quite a bit, but if I was to just explore when I was drafting, I would never write anything because I would be so in my own head questioning every single thing I did.
Yeah, I think when I'm drafting or when I'm revising, I sometimes like to have like the next 5 scenes or 4 scenes outlined but I don't go further than that. And when people say that they want to learn how to be an outliner, I'm like, you know, outlining is great, but I can't outline the whole thing. So I do first, like, the next, like, 4 to 5 scenes, and that really helps me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have somewhere in here, I use it for my school visits, but I have a literal poster that is the first outline of my debut that is as big as me.
That's amazing.
And it's still too small to read it comfortably. That's how insane it is. So students really love, it's a very dramatic thing to pull out. But it's also different, like, per project. Like, some projects, like that project really required an insane amount of structure from the beginning. And it changes depending on what your book needs. And I imagine also the types of inspiration that work change for you guys depending on what your book is.
Yeah. With the writing that I'm doing with my friend, I write a chapter and then she writes the next chapter because it's dual perspective. And so it's my character, then her character. And I have to read her chapter before I know what's going to happen next. It's like literally like we are just flying by the seat of our pants, at least for me. She has an outline that she's like tried to get me to go by, but it's just like, it's not working. I'm trying, but I just keep writing stuff and I'll just be like, what if this happens? And she's like, okay. And she builds it into the outline. And it's like very obvious that she's more of an outliner and like she's read these books about plotting and like the hero's journey. And I've tried reading those and I'm like, no, I just like throw them away. And I'm like, I can't read that. I just need to like write the book and write the scene and see where it takes me. But everybody's different. And I kind of wish I was more like you, that I could like outline and have these big like journals, because it would make it a lot, I think, faster to be a writer. But I could be wrong. How long does it take you to finish a draft?
It depends on things. My debut, I drafted the first draft in a month, I think.
Oh my God. Wait, how long was that book?
It's a middle grade contemporary. So it was about, I think the first draft was like 47,000. But I also write really fast. So,
I write so slow. You're lucky.
To finish a picture book. And we're talking 1,000 words.
Picture books are hard though. Like, people don't
They're really hard.
How hard they are.
They're kind of like poetry. Like, every word has to be very important.
Yeah. I think that's what people forget, and what I would sometimes forget too, with like when I'm working with my publisher and stuff, she'd send me these notes and I would spend like a week literally trying to revise a sentence. I'm like, I have to get across what you want me to mean in this sentence, and it's like 10 words. So.
Yeah. That's how it goes in picture book land and poetry land, all that stuff.
Yeah. All right, to bring us back sort of towards inspiration, because I think we've gone a little bit tangent. What do you guys do? Do you ever have spells where it's just like there is no inspiration and nothing feels right? And other than the things we've talked about, like reading in your genre, what are things that you can do that help fill your well, or that help like create that spark again for you?
So, Hannah, do you want to start or you want me to start?
Sure, I'll start. Mine is simple. I stopped working on the project. I'm not going to force it because I'm going to make myself miserable and then I'm going to hate the project. So I stopped working on the project, and then I read a bunch of books in my genre. I work out, I go for walks, I play with my kids, and I don't think about the project until I let myself get re-excited about it. So it's really weird, and I don't know how to explain it. But it's almost like I start to miss my babies. And so I let myself start to miss them. I even let myself miss them a couple days before it gets to this point where I'm just like, I have to dive back into this project. So
right.
Yeah.
That's good.
For me, I think I'm a little different. I like to just get out of town. Like, that sounds kind of dramatic, but I love traveling. And I wish I could travel more often, but I just love traveling. And so I like to just take a day trip somewhere and just like breathe and get away from my space and get away from everything else and just kind of try to find a new inspiration in a different location of the world. Mm-hmm. Like, I went to Seattle recently for the ALA conference, and that was really inspiring because I was a new place and new things to see. And I I just have to get out of town. Like I go on like mini writing retreats every now and then where I'll just take my dolls to like a cabin in the woods, and I get so much done there because it's the space of like my home, I think, and like the consistency of like I'm in Portland right now and this is like where I live, and getting away sort of breaks your mindset and makes it easier to find inspiration that you wouldn't expect to find. At least for me.
Definitely. I was going to say the same, especially when I'm writing fantasy. It's really fun because you can go, you know, just find some museums that are local or nearby or locations that you haven't been to. And anything, especially when you're doing fantasy, can potentially spark an entirely new idea. So it's really exciting to always discover and find little bitty details that you could then use in your own fiction. And if you don't find something that you're like, yeah, eureka, that's the thing, then it's like, well, that was still a fun day out.
Yeah.
And if you do, then you're like, oh, that was the most amazing thing ever. And I think too, for me, both in fantasy and in contemporary, it's also really inspiring if you have a setting that's like a specific setting or that's based off of a setting. My fantasy YA is based off of Venice. And so I went on my little like Venice in the middle of winter trip, which was easier to do because I was in England, so airplane tickets were very cheap.
Yeah.
But you know, and go and be like, all right, I'm gonna just walk around the alleys and like see all this spooky stuff, and like, how does it smell? How does it feel when like the bells of the city go off? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And really engaging your senses in the place you are. My debut is in Boston, which I've only been to twice. So when I went there, it was a lot of what does it smell like when I'm here? What am I hearing? And just kind of like imagining your character walking around and what they would be thinking. And that sort of immersive experience, I think, is really inspirational, and also I think helps strengthen the writing.
Absolutely.
And it's really fun. And
as a fantasy writer, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, you feel it's like one of those fun eccentric writer things that you're like, I'm so eccentric right now, pretending to be my character.
You know, it's funny. I've never tried to be my characters. I've just like let them talk to me in my mind. I'll be like, what are you thinking? You know, and that sounds very eccentric, I guess it kind of is. I think sometimes my characters like to hide from me.
Yeah, I've also found, I was thinking about this last night actually, because one of my presents to myself when I got my advance was subscribing to this subscription box, which is cliche, but
which one?
It's called Wonder Objects, I think. But it's like, it's a box that's for storytellers. So every box is a story, and all the items in it are part of the story.
That sounds amazing.
It's really cool. One of the one that sold me on it, it's like a luxury box, so it's kind of expensive. But the one that sold me on it was like, what if the constellations invited you to a ball? And so like everything in the box was like themed around that, and I was like, that is amazing.
That's so cute. I love that. You should link us to that because I'm curious to look into it.
Yeah. But it was really cool. So last night I had my one, and so I put on like one of my fantasy soundtracks, you know, and I dimmed the lights in my room, light a candle, and open the box slowly and like pour over everything and really take time. This one had a character who liked lavender. So the box, when you opened it, just smelled like lavender. And so it's just like sitting and thinking about just really engaging your senses and putting yourself in the scene, in this instance, the scene that these people have created for me. But I find that it's something that I always forget to do with my own stuff, because with digital world, it's like I have so many resources. I can just Google whatever.
Yeah.
But then Googling whatever versus like I got a little crystal ball was in mine last night. and versus like holding that in your hand and being like, this is what it feels like to me, and this is what I think when I'm holding it, are just like completely different things. And it would be a shame to just be like, oh, I Googled what that is, so whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is a wonderful thing, but there's something special about feeling something for yourself and like going outside and seeing it for yourself. Definitely. That's why I love traveling.
Yeah.
That's cool. Hannah, again with picture books, can you remind me if you just write or if you also illustrate your books?
Oh no, I don't illustrate.
That's what I thought. So I was gonna make sure before I asked an embarrassing question.
I draw beautiful stick figures. Yeah. Children laugh at my drawings. They always ask me at book readings, and I'll draw a picture for them, and they will literally laugh. And I'm like, you see, this is why publishers hire illustrators for people like me.
Yeah.
Yes.
That does make me think. One of the things that I like to do when a project is done, to reward myself, is I like to commission an artist to do pictures of the main characters. It's so much fun, and that's also very like a reward. But it also is like, oh, I want to get back to it and write more.
I back when I was in high school, I wrote a book. I mean, you know, the high school book that people sometimes write. And my favorite thing was that my friend drew, like, I don't know, I guess she drew not just the character, but also like a cool font with their name. And it was so lovely. And I still have it. And I just love it.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the magical things, at least for me with picture books. It's being your main character for the first time. And I cried both times that I've seen them. Just, you know, you got the image.
Yeah.
And you guys know, because like when you have people draw it for you, it's just, it's real. They're real.
Yeah. I've asked my mom to draw me my characters because she's an artist. I'm like, Mom, will you draw my characters? And she's like, I have to read your book first. And I haven't let her do that.
Yeah, my sister is an artist, and so I'm like, don't you want to draw fan art for my stuff? And she's like, are you going to pay me? Because I don't have a sister rate. But she has actually been very nice to me. So I can't complain too much. But yeah, it's been really fun even just doing the debut year and being like, look, here are the portraits my sister drew. And everyone's always like, oh, those are cool. Wait, your sister did that?
Yeah.
So you should use that as a selling point for your mom.
Definitely.
All right, my friends, I think that we're about out of time. Does anyone have any like kind of concluding wisdom about inspiration?
I think like we said at the beginning, take what's going to work for you from this. We all three had very different ideas. Try them out and then do what works for you. There's not really a wrong way to get inspired.
Absolutely. I always like to say that it's really just feeding your own needs rather than trying to find the needs that other people like but won't work for you. It's really just about your needs and what your project needs. Sometimes your needs will be different based on your project, and what worked for your last book won't work for this book, you know. So be kind to yourself. You have to be kind to yourself. As writers, we beat ourselves up, so be kind to yourself.
Yeah, and then I would just say, yeah, just find the things that spark joy.
Yes.
And also in my organized way that completely robs everything of magic. But also like when you find things that spark joy, like make a list of it. Because sometimes when you're like completely out of it and not feeling like yourself and not feeling the project at all, it's really hard to be like, oh, but I was really excited when I went to that place and saw that thing. But if you have it written down, then you're like, oh, I can go back. It's like one of those self-care things where you're just like, oh, that was a moment of inspiration. I'll go back and read that book or watch that movie or visit that museum or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that can be really helpful. All right. Well, I'm going to close this out. I hope we will see everyone at Ride on Con, which is next Friday.
Yay!
Which I'm not panicking about. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great conference and makes lots of writer friends and connections. And thank you guys so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.